So hello everyone, welcome again to another Avocado release meeting. This time we're going to be talking about Sprint 68 and the release 68.0 version 68.0 is coming out, and it's going to be the last version before the LTS release. So for the next sprint, we do expect to spend almost all of our time on bug fixing and a general polishing of the release so that we can freeze it for long-term support. So let me go ahead and share the Trello board. So from bottom to top, this is what we have done on this release. So you see a lot of bugs that we triaged. Some of them were not reproducible anymore, and this is one example. So this is an issue that I found some time ago, in which we would see a bug on the journal plugin showing a failure on the start method. We triaged it again, and we didn't see this issue anymore, so it was fixed between the opening of the card and then by the time we handle it, the time we got back to it. So this card is about RPM lint. So to try to really be honest about what we produce, we have packages that can be built right off the upstream source. And the spec files that we have, they cover Python 2, they cover Python 3, and they cover a bunch of different platforms. So we do take into account the requirements that are available on, say, a platform such as Enterprise Linux 7, different from um, the latest Fedora versions. So there is quite the spec file that we ship. It's kind of large, kind of complex, and because we have too many, like so many different packages with plugins, and it's everything. It's pretty modular at this point. We have a lot of warnings when we run RPM lint, and this card was basically about making sure that we don't introduce errors on the packages, and that we try to minimize, if possible, or eliminate the warnings. To be honest, what I did find is that there's no built-in mechanism on RPM lint, and this is the issue that is still open on the upstream RPM lint project. Hopefully it's coming up. Yeah. Which does not allow you to say disable some types of warnings, only care about errors or things like that. So it's still something that people are working on. There's even the logics that RPM lint follows. But anyway, for our own purposes, we decided to um, not spend too much time on warnings. We actually looked at a few other packages and how they actually contain lots of warnings, lots of errors. So I think a functional level testing of the packages is what we should be most concerned with than those warnings. So our release test plan has been slightly tweaked so that we don't we have a more honest approach with warnings. So warnings are expected to be available, but we should keep an eye on errors and address errors if we find them before we release the packages. Um, the next card is about a really nice feature which could and should have been the default behavior of Avocado since the beginning. So to make a very straightforward statement here, it is a very nice feature that users should not know about it. And Lukasz is going to show what's the difference between the previous release and the behavior on this release when it comes to the Avocado tags and recursive.
Okay, hello guys. So basically, you should know about this. So uh, this is about discovering of tests. So if you remember there, let me share my screen. Oh, sorry, cancel here. Screen. Basically, if you do avocado list test.py, it should show you some tests. And how do we detect that? It's basically if you inherit from avocado import test, it inherits here. But people want us to inherit tests and have some shared tests between different tests. So we added those avocado recursive or avocado enable or disable notations, so etc. To basically say, okay, hey, safe loader, look at my parent as well and try to find all or gather all methods that are available, basically as if you just load it, because that way you get all of that, like you inherit from all the classes. We decided not to do it by default at first because we're using static analysis and we didn't want it to break stuff, so or even slow down things like but in the end we discovered that it's not that slow and we can probably do it by default. So basically this tag is not needed anymore, because for object we find, we descend the hierarchy and see whether it actually inherits from test or not. You can still use the Avocado recursive or enable or disable at any point. We reflect that we don't discover tests that are disabled, etc. So you can use it as before, but you don't have to specify the recursive anymore. So if you have something like this, which is like it inherits from recursive and that it inherits from pure avocado, that inherits from test. If you check out the parent master and try to list the tests, you will see that it finds actually all tests. So you have one pure avocado, which is the test pure. Then you have the recursive, which is inherited from pure, so it has the test pure and recursive. And then you can execute inherited test that has all three methods. When I check out back to some older version like 65, it discovers just one, which seems like a bug to me, but I haven't had time to look at it yet. It should discover the recursive as well.
True.
So basically, forget everything you knew, and just assume it works the same way as Python unit test. There is one big but, and that is, I should have probably showed that. If you do something like this, sorry, def init self, and use
If you dynamically add test methods
yes, if you
that match
dynamically add
the
test
test.
methods like test lambda, and ideally like people use that usually in cycles. So for if you do something like this, it should work in Python unit test because it actually executes the init, but it does not work in Avocado. On the contrary, if you do something like this, and you use list in Avocado, it won't remove anything. I mean, I know you have to use no preserve root. Sorry. If you discover this in Python unit test, it will remove your root directory. If you do
Mhm.
it in Avocado, if you just list the test, it won't do anything. It won't execute anything. It will just discover the test. If you get to the point when you run the test, it will obviously screw your system, but you should be aware of that little nuance.
Yeah.
With
So
that, back to you.
thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the demo, and it's definitely a huge usability improvement. We did the safe loader for a reason, so people could, in theory, just like fetch test repos and list them. And when they get to running them, they can choose to run them on other environments such as containers, virtual machines, that kind of thing. Of course, we can improve on the automation part of making sure those tests are transparently executed there, but we'll not get into those topics at this point. So the next card that we have here on Dawn was a consequence of a few improvements to our build process. So we have deployed, and it's a work in progress task, but basically we're planning to rely on Copper, which is a Fedora community service, to build our packages. And what happened there is that we get to build packages on other platforms. So we are building packages and also running the test as part of the package builds on platforms such as Power. And that that reviewed a few assumptions that we sometimes make when regards to platform. So for instance, this test uh, we use to rely on VM image default behavior of choosing the architecture matching the host environment. And we would expect that the file that would be returned here, the file name URL that would be returned here would be x86-64. But given that it's running on Power, it was a different one. So it just hopefully gets a few corner cases when running tests on different environments, and that was one of them. The next one was also unveiled by the same work, and it was basically a fix that revealed that PyYAML, specific versions of PyYAML were different in different distro versions. So Fedora 29 was able to fulfill this version requirement, but other distros would have to settle with other versions. So it was just like some bug fixes and package um, adjustments so that we have everything building on all of those platforms. This card was really about communicating our plans with regards to this release, the next one, which is going to be the LTS release, and finally, what we plan to do after we finished the LTS release. So LTS is going to be, it's expected to have maintenance of at least 18 months. And that means that by the time we get there, we will have an completely unsupported as far as the upstream project goes, Python version 2. So we do expect that starting from Avocado version 70, which is the one right after LTS, we'll be a lot more aggressive when it comes to deprecating, dropping features, and dropping even the Python 2 support. So this is a heads up to the community. We have seen most Avocado-related projects like Avocado VT properly supporting Python 3 now. So we think it's a good trade-off when it comes to energy to just stick with LTS, Avocado LTS for the platforms that do require Python 2, and then move on to a pure Python 3 world after that. Um, the next card was a bug that was fixed with documentation. Kyle worked on this, and it was basically about the behavior of the mux inject tag, not tag, but command line option, and how you either have to insert a path to your keynote value, or you have to set to add the default path to the paths that are looked for when you actually fetch a given parameter. So there is the conceptual information, and there is a practical example here that shows the different behavior when you use when you don't use a path, and when you use a path, or when you don't use a path and you add a given path such as root to your search path for parameters. Uh, Kaio, if you want to say anything more about this.
No, no further questions. Just a matter to comment that it was just a documentation change. There
Yeah.
was no change in code.
Yeah. Next one was also just a small usability fix. So we were seeing, I was seeing, I'm not sure if it was reproducible to everyone, but I was seeing this output when listing some test directories that happen to contain restructured text. And the third and the fourth line, they are fine. They're part of Avocado output. But the second line here says error parsing. It's not something we expected. And we weren't sure where this was coming from. It turned out that the robot plugin actually accepts tests in RST, and it tries to parse the RSTs, and that is fine. But what's not fine is actually producing content on the Avocado UI, because it's confusing and it's not its place to give that info. So we basically came up with a fix initially to try to not look at RST files, but then we decided to come up with a second approach, which was just to silent the robot plugin, which makes more sense, because if robot plugin actually finds tests there, it should list them. Next one, it's kind of related to a previous card that we showed. Sorry, that we showed that handled some version requirements adjustments on the RPM spec file. This was the original motivation, and it was based on a CVE warning that GitHub sent us, saying that we were using a version of PyYAML that was subject to a security issue. So we tried to handle this on the setup.py file for different Python versions, but in the end, when we went to the packaging side of it, we found out that we should really deal with this on the packaging side. And one note that Lukasz pointed out is that the specific part of the feature of PyYAML that is subject to a security issue is not one we are using. So there shouldn't be like really any real effects or any real security issues with our use of PyYAML. And we actually took note, and we have a card that deals with a possible migration of the loader that we use and move that to the safe loader that PyYAML provides. This next card it was actually a work that was contributed initially, and Kaio took over and rewrote the basically, if I remember correctly, he rewrote the implementation, really making it simple. And what this gives us is, if you want to know the process, the CPUs that a given process and its threads are using, you can just use this one function. So get PID CPUs will return one or many CPUs that may be in use by a given process and its threads. So nice utility function there. Next one was another bug. So we noticed that we would have a crash. I guess it was a crash. Yes, a crash when listing specific types of tests, and this was actually an internal bug. So we were forgetting to pass a mandatory argument to an internal method. So this was fixed and the crash was addressed. And finally, we had this, which was adding Python 3 to the Fedora Avocado Docker image. So it was a change that was outside of the Avocado repo, and it was done on Lukash repo for the Docker file. And it basically links, it installs and then it links Avocado 3 to Avocado. So we actually forgot to put a label here. I'll go ahead with documentation FC experiments, which is what we use for packaging as well. There are a few things that we'll continue working on for this release. Just a few minor issues, like some comments that we do have to clean out. This is what this card was about. We triaged the issue. It was not really an issue. It was a misperception of how those utility functions should work on my part. And now we just have to clean up the code and remove some of the comments there. Also, I did notice a few temporary directions being left while running our unit tests, our self-tests. So we'll probably address those. And then one other thing that may make its way into this version, or maybe for the LTS version, is, where is it? Oh, so we don't have a Trello card. We just have a GitHub pull request, but it's about allowing plugins to set the configuration files that should be used. So basically, this should simplify how plugins can relate to the Avocado configurations. Other than that, the other cards will probably be subject for the next sprint. And for the next sprint, we will, of course, continue doing the tasks that we have here in work in progress. And we'll be basically be addressing bugs. So if you look at the sprint backlog, you see nothing but bugs and oddities, like those issues that happen with Inspector. Um, and given that it's going to be an LTS release, we'll spend a lot of our own time. Actually, this has to come here because it's the LTS. And I think we may have other LTS cards. But anyway, the goal of this next sprint, which is going to be sprint 69, culminating in version 69.0, is to really try to approach Avocado as a user and really try to make sure it works as polished as possible. It behaves in the most correct way as possible. So this is what we expect to do for the next sprint. Possibly no new feature, no API change, unless we have already started working on this for this release and slipped on this. Any comments, questions, remarks?
Not for me.
So expect I'll be sending out the release test plan results shortly, and then I'll send the release announcement either later today or early tomorrow, and then we'll start another cycle, which is going to be the LTS sprint. I guess that's all. If anybody has any closing remark. No. So thanks everyone, and see you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.